Hey, everybody. It looks like we're live. Welcome. Welcome to our presentation. I'm Dr. Susan Thackeray, and
I'm Dr. Lynn Thackeray.
And you're right, we are married. It is a partnership here that we've had for over 40 years, Lynn, right?
That's correct.
So we want to tell you today about our project at UVU, and we think you're going to enjoy it. And I think it's a little outside the box for at least for ethics students along the lines of pluralism. We're going to show you how pluralism applied to a technical arena. So Dr. Thackeray, do you want to talk about your educational background and your professional background?
Well, yes, I do. Actually, I'll be brief, but I spent about 25 years in software development in the technical industry. My undergraduate was in computer science at BYU. And as mentioned, worked in that field for quite a few years, decided to move into education. And I actually went back to school with my partner here, and we received our master's degrees from Utah State in instructional technology. And then a few years later, we continued our education at Northeastern University in Boston, where we both received our doctorate degrees. As far as my work experience goes, I was in technology management, went up through the different positions from individual contributor as a software engineer into management, and later senior management, and do have experience with putting teams together, different teams, and managing those teams in a software engineering environment. I embraced the agile processes early on in the early 2000s, and have had good experience with that, and I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot from that, and pluralism is a major factor when you're working with the different technical teams, and this is part of what we'll be talking about today.
So one thing that Dr. Thackeray didn't mention is he also is the holder of several patents. And he also didn't mention that we did our master's degree together in Namibia, is where we did our research. We represented Utah State University in Namibia. And so, yeah, we've had some good experiences. The other thing he didn't mention is when we both applied to our doctorate program at Northeastern, we didn't know if one would get in and the other wouldn't. So we had to stand on our own merits. In fact, we had the same classes, but we were never in the same classes during our doctorate programs. And to this day, I don't think you've ever read my dissertation. Have you, Dr. Thackeray?
I've got close a few times.
Yeah. So we both, we have followed parallel lines, but we also have our own areas of expertise. My background is in project and product management. My undergrad is in digital media. And so that's the technical experience that I bring to the table. And yes, we had a lot of fun doing this project. Let's talk about it. Go ahead to that next slide, and we'll talk about it. So together, I will tell you what we're going to talk about today. We created a project, a cross-functional team project, a cross-departmental project at UVU. And we will talk to you today about that. We organized a diverse team of students, and we came up with a plan, a structure, and then we implemented. And then we have some really interesting outcomes that you're going to want to hear about. And we're also going to show you. So we'll talk to you about our students. We'll talk to you about the relationships that were developed with those students between each other. And then we're going to talk to you and show you the project deliverable on the outcomes. It's kind of interesting. Let's carry on. So what happened on the next slide? Oops, let's see. It looks like, oh yeah. Let me tie it back together, back to pluralism. As you know, let's see. It looks like the slide didn't advance in live yet. I don't know for sure why. There it goes. Okay, back to the first slide, Dr. Thackeray. I'm not seeing. Okay, the power structures, the shifting power structures of cross-functional teams. The title of our project is the shifting, or our presentation today is the shifting, I'm waiting for the slide to advance. Thank you. So the shifting power structures of cross-functional teams, how to manage technical projects. The technical projects, which the description of our presentation today, technical projects which promote innovation, require a diverse team of subject matter experts. A pluralist system of project development allows technical teams to leverage strength of expertise to collaborate effectively. And such a pluralistic collaboration was successfully demonstrated at UVU between the computer science graduate course and a technology management introduction course. Both of us are the faculty involved, and we're going to discuss how we taught our students to recognize and manage the power of diversity within a technical team. That follows the theme of this conference of pluralism, engaging ethical, religious, and cultural diversity. But what you may not be aware of, it also involves management. And did you want to say anything else about pluralism or our?
I just wanted to say that this project that we set up, this environment, we set up this learning environment, does mirror what the students will experience in industry.
Thank you. Yeah, so the first thing that we did is we wanted to make sure that we organized a diverse team. We're strongly committed to working ethically and effectively. And let's get into the plan of how we came up with this idea. So the plan was we began to talk to each other and recognize that within the educational structure in both of our courses, that students weren't getting a real industry, as Dr. Thackeray mentioned, a real industry experience. Students are often in a degree silo. They only are learning about what their degree is, which seems appropriate. The students in our courses don't necessarily have professional experience, that they haven't, started their career yet. They're still working on their degree. And the other thing that we were well aware of is that students are nervous about coursework. They always are in my class. Are they in yours?
Oh, they are nervous and they push back on it. And I do use the team concept in my courses. And we'll talk about how we did this in a collaborative way. But in industry, and probably true of most fields, I know in the technology, the software development field, everything is developed by teams. Very rarely do you get just an individual coming up with a killer application. That might be spun that way in the press, but very rarely does that happen because software is complex, very complex. And while an gifted individual contributor could probably come up with something, it would be far outside the time scope of an industry release. So students do need to be able to work in teams, which means communication skills, which means team management skills.
Yes, so we came up with this idea that we wanted to work together. And frankly, because both our backgrounds are similar, but Dr. Lynn Thackeray has a different background than I do. And so we just thought that this was a perfect match. And so we went for it. Let's talk about what ideas we came up. So what we did is we came up with a structure to create a semester project that mirrors industry. And we wanted it to utilize agile management because that is a typical industry standard for the software industry. And then we wanted the students to allow them to drive that project outcome. And we, as faculty, we wanted to be the guide on the side, not the sage on the stage. We wanted to serve as the client and supervisor roles. So would you want to, Dr. Thack, tell us about project management? I know you're agile management, specifically. I know that you're an expert in this area.
Well, agile management came into wide use around 2000. 2003, 2005. And prior to that time, software projects were managed with a waterfall approach, which actually mirrored a manufacturing type of environment, which of course software is not a manufacturing process. It's not replicatable. It's a creative process. So there needed to be a technical management framework that allowed for change, allowed to manage the chaos of changing functionality. And Scrum is one such agile process, which is very, very popular. It's team-based. They call the team Scrum teams, and it could be several teams per project if needed. Scrum is a term that comes from rugby, where they group together in kind of a huddle. And that's what Scrum teams do. They group together in a huddle. Each team is fully cross functional, which means they have all the resources on their team necessary to succeed. They're also self-driven. They choose what they're working on from a list of priority tasks. And then at the end of a certain cycle, and they call that a sprint cycle, they would put on a review to all the stakeholders of the project. And so the stakeholders could see actual working progress going on. What we did in our organization, in our semester project here, my team, the developers, were divided up into Scrum teams. We identified what's called a Scrum Master, which is basically a leader of the team. Now, this is a servant leader, and leadership's a big part of software engineering. They're all equal in being able to make suggestions and come to a consensus, but the Scrum Master actually manages the process. And we had our sprints were broken into 2-week sprints, 8 of them. So everyone in my class got to be a Scrum Master. We identified a corporate project, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And then the managers come from Susan's area.
Yeah,
the communication is remote generally, and we'll go into more detail about that.
Yeah, so the project managers, as I mentioned earlier, my students were introductory students, and Lynn's students were graduate students. So as you notice on the slide here, the structure that we came up with is that we wanted those students to develop Scrum teams. We wanted them to identify a Scrum Master, which would be in the graduate course. And we wanted a project manager, corporate project manager in the students that were in my course. And we wanted them to understand and determine the best methods of communication working on a remote project. So yeah, let's go on to the next slide. So we implemented this project into the fall 2019 semester, so a year ago, roughly a year ago. And we gave our students a task to develop an electric robotic lawnmower simulation. We asked them to do 8 2-week sprints. And we also, they didn't know this, but we introduced unexpected project revisions, just like in a real setting. It doesn't always just go smooth and you get your tasks all up front and then you just develop a deliverable and it's handled. We actually intervened and kind of messed up their schedule a little bit. So they had certain milestones within the course. They had to have a project launch and show us that they were organized with the right roles and the right ideas to launch this project. Right around midterm, we had a project status to see where they were at. And as client, I was typically the client. I would review and decide if I thought, it was doable and if they were going to meet their timelines. So that was right at midterm. And then they had a deliverable close to the end of the semester where they delivered to the client their end product simulation. And then at the very end for their final, they had a project post-mortem so that they could talk about what went well and what didn't go so well. And from your end, how did you see this project?
Well, we set up this project with a fictitious company that built lawn care equipment, and this is where the task or the project of building an electronic robotic lawnmower simulator came from. And as my colleague has mentioned, there were milestones. These are the four main milestones, but there were also weekly milestones that took place as, sprint planning sessions, mid-sprint reviews, and then of course the sprint review that takes place at the end of the sprint. These were all student driven from both of the courses, classes.
So we had some very interesting outcomes that we're excited to share. This is not a new thing to recognize that diverse teams deliver better outcomes. This is why, some of the background both of us do on research is we're very focused on equitable teams, which means building teams with women, building teams with minorities, building teams that are diverse, that can contribute. And so that was another one of our efforts, is we wanted our students to recognize the power of diversity and the power of shared ideas. We create better solutions for today's problems when we have diverse teams. And I know, Dr. Thackeray, you have some kind of article or something that you wanted to tell us about that confirms
I do.
this.
Actually, I've got, I found out in industry that setting up a diverse team does make the product better. I'll just read here from the Scientific American that basically, they say, simply put, diverse teams make us work better because diversity makes everyone on the team challenge their own thinking more often. Members of a homogeneous group rest somewhat assured that they will agree with one another, that they will understand one another's perspectives and beliefs, and that they will be able to easily come to a consensus. But when members of a group notice that they are socially different from one another, they change their expectations. They anticipate differences of opinion and perspective. They assume they will need to work harder to come to consensus. When disagreement comes from a socially different person, we are all prompted to work harder. Diversity joins us into a cognitive action in ways that a homogeneous group does not. And, this is particularly true in computer science. Computer science, just by the nature of computer science and how it is taught, is a siloed organization. And oftentimes, students will take this attitude into industry. And of course, in industry, as we mentioned, they'll be working as members of a team. In fact, today, diversity is interviewed for, team skills are interviewed for, communication skills are interviewed for. 20 years ago, they were nice to have, but on top of the technical expertise, students do need to have these skills.
Totally agree. And what I notice and what I teach in my tech management courses is the idea of innovation. In order to innovate, that diversity is critical. And as you know, technologies move so quickly that if you're a company that is not innovating or even aware of emerging technologies, then you're going to lose ground really quickly. And if you are a siloed person in a technical arena, you're only going to grow and be as big as that person. So you always want to expand the net, include as many, make sure the discussions are diverse. Anything else we want to say about this?
I think we should talk about our students for a moment.
Yeah, let's do it. So I know in my students, so the slide will come up soon, but in my course was Tech 3000, It's an introduction to technology management, and we're in the Department of Technology Management in the College of Engineering and Technology. We're both in the College of Engineering and Technology, but we're in different departments. My particular students, as you can see by the description of the course here, they're learning special characteristics of managing and leading technology dependent organizations, which, come on, let's face it, pretty much every organization now is technology dependent. We cover leading influential technologies, technology's impact on organizational structure and the policy process, strategic technological planning, future studies, leadership, global aspects of technology management. There's your diversity. Many times you'll have teams all over the world. There's cultural issues that come up that must be addressed. Performance assessment. How do you assess your technical teams? And then the life cycles, financing, and some of the major ethical implications of managing technology dependent organizations. So that was my task, is to build those types of students and to introduce them to the critical aspects of all of that. And so I wanted a real world project within the class. Of course, they had a textbook and other assignments, but I wanted to add to it a collaboration project. And this is this is the types of students I had. The bulk of my students that particular semester actually were taking my course, and their degree was focused in automation, electrical automation and robotic technology known as ERT. So I had a lot of ERT students, but they had technical background, but not necessarily management background.
And my course is part of the computer science master's program, CS 6300, software engineering leadership. The outcomes of this course are to prepare students to be software project leaders, evaluate modern software processes, and project management identifies important roles in software projects and their contribution to project success. And so we also go and explore the business needs and project development. Now, as mentioned before, computer science tends to be a siloed organization. These folks are, most of them are working professionals who've graduated, gone out in the industry for a number of years and have come back. So they did have some experiences with this, but generally with technology folks, particularly computer science, to come to an agreement among yourselves is very, that's very quick. But the reality is, in industry, they're going to be dealing with project leaders, project managers, such as what's represented here from the Tech 3000 course, and they'll need to communicate and work with those people. And computer scientists speak a different language, and sometimes they forget that not everybody is a computer scientist. And so they'll talk in technical terms and expect folks that come from a different environment and a different background to understand them. And one of the outcomes of this project that we did is the feedback I got from my students is they had to learn how to communicate effectively with non-technical people. And for a computer science, non-technical means non-programmer. And so this is where I can add that my professional experience as a project manager, I had to, let's see, how can I say, mediate between technical people and maybe not as much technical people. So I had marketing people, I had designers, and I had programmers on my team. And the programmers thought the designers were clueless, and the designers thought the programmers were arrogant, and they both were irritated that the marketers were promising promises we couldn't keep. And I was the manager of that type of team, trying to keep everybody on the same page so that product can get delivered in the right method. And so when I first introduced this course project to my students, they were super uneasy and not impressed at all. They did not want to work with graduate students. Certainly they didn't want to work with
computer science students, and they didn't even know what their role could be in the managing the project, which is what I explained to them that their task was to keep everybody on time, on budget, and on scope time resources to get that deliverable out the door in an effective manner. And so yes, those were our students, and they didn't understand. Both sets had trouble understanding how this collaboration would work and why we would even do something like this.
As Dr. Thackeray's pointed out earlier, that we as the instructors, we stepped back and just offered guidance, but we didn't directly insert ourselves into the process. And the Agile process is deeply collaborative. And in this case, the Tech 3000 students were the ones that would present the new functionality that was added that Dr. Thackeray and myself would come up with during the life cycle of this project, and they would have to communicate that to the Scrum teams, to the programmers. Something has changed here. We need to do this, and we need to collaborate together to find out what that means and how we will add that functionality. So there became a very deep collaboration.
Yeah, and I think we're ready to go to the next slide. So what happened as those students did start developing those relationships, and as we mentioned earlier, we switched out those project managers and those Scrum Masters every sprint, every 2 weeks, so that many students would get the opportunity for the leadership. In my particular class, all of our project managers were required to come back to a specific team, and they would collaborate within the classroom too, and help guide the project manager on what to say to the Scrum teams, so that everybody got an experience of what it was like to organize and call the shot and keep that project going. And I think, Lynn, you also, didn't you have your teams switch out leaders?
Yes, we did. We had Scrum Masters switch out for every sprint. So each student in my course got the experience of actually leading a Scrum team. We had 2 Scrum teams, and these Scrum teams worked independently of each other. And we'll see some of the deliverables they came up with. They were given the same functionality, the same problem to solve, and they solved it in different ways. But everyone got a chance to lead the Scrum team and to take charge of the communication for that week, and both written and verbal. And so it was an enriching experience from the feedback that I received from my students. It was an enriching experience, and these students, as I mentioned before, had industry experience, a lot of industry experience.
And see, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, and so not most of mine didn't, as they might have had industry experience, but not necessarily project management experience. But what happened was the students began to recognize their own subject matter expertise, and they recognized the subject matter expertise of each other. And they began to recognize that they each had value to the deliverable, that they were contributing to that deliverable in their very own way. As you mentioned earlier, Lynn, that the idea of agile management is designed for that service leadership role, that it's not meant to have some power over others. I don't know if you want to talk slightly more about that before I go into the relationships a bit more.
Well, definitely, for a full collaboration in the agile process, the leadership that takes place there is really servant leadership, which means that the leader is also a servant to the group. It's not a hierarchical organization. It is a flat organization. And because it is flat, because it's a servant leadership, it does it does encourage full collaboration. From the very start of the project, everyone was considered equal. Everyone got input on how we're going to solve this problem. And this does mirror what happens in industry, the software development industry. A fully functional cross-function team will have designers, they will have programmers, they will have quality assurance individuals, and everyone gets input right from the start of the project, which of course gives a sense of ownership for the entire team. You can contrast that with a more waterfall approach that used to be the norm a decade or so ago, where a group of senior people would design the project and then hand their designs off to the programmers. They would program it, hand their work off to quality assurance or testers. And, there were disconnects there. Programmers thought, well, I don't like this design. I had no input on it. So there was problems with ownership, problems with motivation. And this newer collaborative approach addresses most of that.
Yes, and so what happened is students evolved their understanding to know that there is no one correct logic, or alternatively, that there is more than one correct logic. And that in itself is the pluralism and the unity where multiple groups share power. Each group played a critical role in the deliverable. And we'll tell you, let's talk about that deliverable right now. So the students were given functional specifications that they needed to collaborate between the Scrum teams and the project management. They were to deliver a product backlog with upcoming sprint schedules. So we needed to know, what they were discussing in their sprints. They had a final project, approximately 500 lines of code per developer. They were to give us a functional specification documents. They were going to give us a technical documentation, how to set up and run the simulation. That we wanted demo presentations. We wanted a simulation and additional phase project backlog with schedule. I just have to tell you, this is a good place to tell you that I had a student who had never done anything like this before. And because of this project towards the end of the semester, he took a shot at a position. He applied for a position and got an interview. And in the interview, the company asked him what he knew about agile management. And because of his experience in the simulation project, he was able to say the right terms. He was able to talk about the project. He was able to talk with authority on his skills as a project manager, and he got the job. So that was way cool. What else about our project deliverables?
Well, I do have the examples of the deliverable. We can certainly show that. A lot of the takeaways I got from my students is that while they knew the value of project management because of their status, this was an actual hands-on attempt where they were actually working in a dispersed environment. Now, I'm teaching the same class this semester, and it's a forced dispersed environment because it's online now. But I also had students come back to me and say, with the emphasis on documentation, with the emphasis on presentation skills, this has helped me in my in my current job. One student I had said, because I knew these things, I could put it on my resume that I have had team experience and used as an example this course project. So some good feedback there.
Yeah, do you want to show the simulations?
Why don't I show the simulation? Like I say, we had two teams. They both had the same specifications. They were both given the same information, and they approached their solutions quite a bit differently. And let me go ahead. I'm going to share my desktop here. And Hopefully we can see this. Hopefully everybody sees this. And as a review, they were the main project was to develop a robotic lawnmower, which would be able to cut the lawn without human intervention and be able to navigate around any obstacles, not go outside the lawn, not run over cats or anything like that. And this was a simulation, software simulation that this fictitious company was to use as a training tool and also as a sales tool. Now, this is our team A here. It is web-based, and the technologies they used are HTML, hypertext markup language, JSON scripting, cascading style sheets with the backend in C++. And so notice here you can have lawn dimensions. I just set it up as 10 to 10. I am going to add some trees that need to be navigated around. And then we're going to start the simulation. And there goes our robotic lawnmower. And you can kind of see that it's going to come back. It's going to go around the tree and continue mowing the lawn. Comes back to get recharged. Now, as mentioned previously, each developer was given a goal of about 500 lines of code. And that's really not a lot of code, but this was not a programming class. This was a leadership course. This was a collaborative course. And so, you know, these simulations, you know, a little rough. And our robotic lawnmower. And you can see the progress here. We can see the battery count, and just finished the lawn, went around all the trees, and is going to go back to the house right there. Now the next project, Team B. Now I've already set up the lawn here. And what I'm going to do is several lawns might need to be cut. I'm going to choose the one here. And we can see it set up here, has the battery charge indicator here. This lawn has some large rocks in it. So let's see how it works. And notice here we do have audio.
I'm thinking this lawnmower reminds me of a Roomba that vacuums. It's kind of a low to the ground.
And while it's a little bit noisy, you can see that it fulfilled the requirements of the assignment. Let me go ahead and find my PowerPoint here again. And I will go ahead and reset the thing up here.
So at this point, we had hoped to have some people in attendance. We recognize that many of you will be watching this after the fact and that just watching the recording. And we understand that in this time of a pandemic, people have a lot of appointments and other obligations, and we're all getting real used to recording and having others view it later. But we don't have as many attendees as we thought today, and so we were hoping for some questions. Maybe the two of us can talk about questions we think people might ask, and just answer some questions. What do you think about that?
Well, that'd be great. I don't know that I have any questions though.
Well, you covered it thoroughly. So I'm thinking that maybe some of the questions would be, and so I'll ask you, Dr. Thackeray, and see if you can answer some of my questions. Maybe I'm a student who is not a technical student, and this collaboration and talking about the shifting powers of structures of cross-functional teams and how to manage technical projects, maybe that's real interesting. But what if I'm not a technical person, but I am part of a cross-functional team? How do these lessons learned apply to someone like me?
Well, everyone comes into a team environment with their own life experiences. And if you have a diverse group, which that is something that I think is very beneficial, they're going to have a different perspective when they're focusing on a particular problem. And all of software development is solving problems. You solve problems with software. And I've found that everyone has something of value to add. Now, part of the servant leadership, part of the management of these type of environments is to set up an environment that is safe, where everyone can feel free to express their ideas. And I have a quote here from Baron Schwartz, who's a founder of a database monitoring startup. He said, you know, if it's just a technical founder and a few engineers, and that's not atypical of experience with startups, you basically have a monoculture there, almost by definition. And with that monoculture, he mentions that you will overlook important things. And this is where the power of diversity comes in. From different backgrounds, you're less likely to overlook different aspects of this potential solution. So I think it's very important to create a culture of acceptance and a safe culture where everyone can express their opinions and feel of value.
I like that approach. And one of the things that I noticed with my students when they were working on this, we had my students, the project management students, interface directly with the client. And I think that also mirrors industry in the sense that the software developers were protected from the client constantly bothering and interrupting the development cycle. The project managers could field those questions. Tell me your background on that, and why it would be important to have certain people have certain roles and do those roles well.
Well, I think you've touched on a very important point here, Dr. Thackeray. And like I say, my perspective is one of software development. And we all know that the only constant in life is change. And that's definitely the case with software development. A project is conceived, designed, and kicked off. And the development effort might take anywhere from a month to 2 months to 6 months to 2 years. And I've worked on enterprise projects that do have that cradle to grave life cycle of upwards of a year or so. Well, things will change during that year. The software industries in general move very quickly, and your marketing people are going to come back in. Your senior managers of the company are going to come back and say, we need to change something. Something has happened in industry. We've got a competitor that's done this, and we need to move to answer this. We need to modify our product to do that. So one thing about an agile process, servant leadership, is to manage the chaos. Developers, software engineers work well when they don't have a lot of disruption. And I think all of us that would resonate with us. Let's just assume that you're a student working on your math homework, and one of your siblings come in and ask you a question or ask you to do something. You've got to break your concentration. You've got to address what that interruption was. And once that's completed, come back and start where you left off, which takes time to immerse yourself back where you're at. This happens in software development. Any disruption to a working team is it might be a 15-minute question, but that disruption is probably 2 hours, particularly if the software engineer has to set aside what he's doing or what she is doing and bring up a whole new environment. This needs to be managed. And so this is where the leaders come in, they'll shield these teams from that experience. And it is actually enforced with an agile process. Once a sprint starts, once a development cycle starts, the contract that the team has with the outside world is they will not be bothered. They will not be interrupted during that time. And the contract that we give the stakeholders is that let them work for this period of time. And then after that sprint is over, they'll show you what you've done and you'll have feedback at that time where you can make modifications. You can change directions at that time. The work is not interrupted, and the stakeholders are usually happy that they do get that scheduled input. Now, at the very worst, if they're working on something for 2 weeks and they present it and the stakeholders say, no, that's not what I wanted, I'm sorry. This happens very infrequently. The worst case scenario is they've lost 2 weeks of work, rather than at the tail end of a 6-month project where they finally demonstrate 6 months worth of work and the stakeholders say, you missed the mark, we need to do it over.
So that kind of goes along the lines of the title of our presentation, the shifting power structures of cross-functional teams. I think what you just explained is that there are different power structures within the team that need to be managed. Am I understanding that right?
Well, actually, the whole power shift is to the team itself. Now I'm going back and doing a compare with, years ago when they didn't have an agile process, when the concept of teams wasn't really used. The power structure was the manager of the department, the owner of the company, the director, and it was a very top-down organization. It was inflexible. Now the power structure is cross-functional teams. They work together. They have full ownership of the project, and they will work collaborative with all stakeholders.
That makes sense. What kind of questions would you ask me as a project manager from a software development point of view?
Well, I think generally coming from developers is, there would be oftentimes pushback on a feature or a function, and they would want the project managers to go back to the stakeholders and in a collaborative way, have them explain what is really needed, why it's needed, what the priority is, and so that's oftentimes can be a disconnect in the communication process, and that. In my experience, that is usually remedied by, as the teams get to know each other, get to know the project managers, there's a certain level of trust that the project manager, has the welfare of the team at stake. They're not just going to pile on additional work just because a stakeholder wants this to happen.
Okay, so that's a great segue into a shifting power structure of a cross-functional team, because as a project manager, I am tempted to satisfy the client and the customer, because that's where our funding comes. That's what pays all of the bills. And so the fact that one of my team members, be it a designer or a software engineer, pushes back and says can't be done, my push would be why. I as a project manager, I'd be willing to allow the time that is needed to handle the scope of the requested project by the client. But although I am interested in the welfare of the team, because they're the ones that create that deliverable, I am also interested in the stakeholder. I'm also interested in the needs and the desire of the client, because if we want to continue to stay in business, we need to meet their needs. So help me understand your thoughts.
Certainly the needs of the stakeholder are they're paramount. Stakeholder are the ones that are our potential customers, the people writing the checks, the paychecks. A software development group is a cost center for most companies. By means of their education and their experiences, they come at a fairly high salary. And so there does need to be justification made. And usually the pushback is it can't be done. I haven't heard that term. It's usually, yes, it can be done, but there are side effects for this. We certainly can do this, but the schedule that we originally have given you is no longer valid. We will have to add XYZ dates to this to get that done. And that does need to be conveyed back to the stakeholders in a meaningful way and put into context.
Yes, absolutely agree. In fact, to me, the role of a good project manager would know that ahead of time, and they would be willing to protect the team by saying to the client, yes, we absolutely can do that. However, there may be more cost involved. There may be more time involved. It may have an impact on what you've already requested. So yes, that totally makes sense. So what we still have plenty of time, and what else do you think is critical for both students and faculty members, and even business people may be watching this video? What is critical to the idea of pluralism and the shifting power structures of cross-functional teams?
I think one of the concepts here is the power of the individual, but the power of the individual working with other individuals to create a team, working as a team. And individuality is celebrated and diversity is celebrated. Each individual does have an equal say. And I think this is the core concept of the agile process themselves, and success of products, both in actually work done and in the communication and collaboration with stakeholders and with other departments in a particular organization.
Okay, so that's great. On that note, let's go to kind of maybe a darker side for a moment. That's realistic. So let's say that we're introducing teams, cross-functional teams, to each other that are very, very different, and they struggle to understand each other. For example, introducing even cultural imbalances. You have teams on another side of the world. They have different work ethics and work schedules. They're working a 20, 30-hour week. You have teams in America who are working 50-hour weeks. It feels inequitable. You're managing this. Help me understand the ethics involved, on how you would build each one of those team members to feel valued as individuals, even though there's high levels of diversity and high levels of misunderstanding between team members.
That's actually a very good question. And I've actually had some experience with that. So I'm going to bring up an example from my past work experience. I was at a company. It was a company that produced library systems. That company's still in business. It's here in Utah County. And I was brought into this to manage the development organization, kind of as a turnaround person. They were struggling to get products out. The product that they had become brittle as far as the software goes. That needed to be redone. And so because of the economics, we decided to go with a diverse team. Now, why there were about 40 or so engineers, software developers, testers that were located here in Utah County. And that was the bulk of the group. But we also had teams in Washington State. We had teams in one team in Canada, a team in the UK, outside of London, and a team in Russia, in St. Petersburg. And of course, we did have a team from the third world area called California. And so not only did we have a communication that, the communications needed to be very deliberate because it's not face to face. And we understand that face to face communications is asynchronous. Emails are synchronous. I can send an email and not get a response for a number of hours. And that does not work in a collaborative organization. Communication does have to be asynchronous. So I depended on certain technologies to help with this. Skype, Zoom, and some of those type of things, those social offerings. Now, here's where the different cultural aspects came into being. The people in Utah and even in California generally come from the same social background. There was some diversity in California. There was greater diversity than what I had in Orem, but in Canada, not only was there diversity of people. Now, generally, we spoke the same language, and same with the UK. Some people would dispute that, but you did have to be careful. There were laws in Canada. Full-time employment was 38 hours a week. If someone went over 38 hours a week, we had to pay overtime, whether they were salaried or not. And so in Utah, the American way of work is you work till you get it done, and people will burn themselves out with 70-hour weeks and things like that. So we had to be respectful of that team in Canada, particularly the team in the UK. The same thing applied. There were laws put into place so that it protected the employee. They have a larger amount of vacation time than we would ever see here. And I actually think that America should adopt some of these things. They also had an overtime requirement that they were paid, but the culture was, no, we're not going to work overtime. We have lives outside of our jobs, and at 5 o'clock we go home. Whereas not so much in the States. And so I had to work through that. Now, the folks in St. Petersburg, and we had quite a large group there. Now, this was a number of years ago. The Soviet Union had, actually imploded before that. And so there were a lot of very intelligent people. Some of them were rocket scientists, Soviet rocket scientists who were working there. So extremely intelligent people, new perhaps to software development, and new perhaps working with Americans. And of course, there's a number of time zones that needed to be taken into consideration. So when we did have our stand-up meetings in Scrum, using Skype in this case, I would be on that meeting, and I would start I'd start the meeting at 7 in the morning my time, and their time was actually, I think, close to 7 p.m. And so there were some differences there, and different cultural things had to be taken into place. In the United Kingdom, even though they normally speak English of sorts, it's a very different.
Wow.
And so we had this, when we were designing our user interface, we had, it had a mail function on it. And so we designed this nice icon of a mailbox with the little mail flag that was up and down. And if you had mail, the flag was up. And if you didn't have mail, the flag was down. And we brought that in, and in these diverse teams we had. And the first thing the folks in the UK said, "What's that?" And people in Utah going, "What's a mailbox? What, don't you have mail over there?" And they go, "We don't have those kind of boxes. We have a mail slot in the door." We don't know what that flag means, and nobody will in countries outside of the United States. So that's an example of some of the benefits you get by having a diverse organization.
Those are perfect. Those are perfect examples. I just noticed, and for those who've asked the questions that are patiently waiting for us to answer, I apologize that that I didn't see them until just now. I was directed to them by the facilitator of this session. So we have several questions, and we're going to answer them all. The first one is, are the teams exposed to some practical ethical dilemma while they are learning how to manage the technical project? Did we do an ethical dilemma in our project? I know they were certainly given a dilemma in that we would throw in change orders. Just as they were moving through the process of their project, we would kind of mess it all up with a change order from the client. But what about an ethical dilemma? Did we introduce any of that into our course?
I don't know that we did.
No, but that's a good, I would like to do that. I think that's a great idea.
About, certainly.
Yeah, good question. I wish we had it, and maybe when we do this again, that would be something
I mean,
I would add.
Do come up obviously in the fields that we're in.
Give me an example of an ethical dilemma that you've had in industry.
Well, client confidentiality.
Oh, yeah.
If you're working in a financial arena, or if you're working in a medical arena, you're governed by some HIPAA laws that you cannot divulge
Yes.
personal information of a individual, and so those things have to be managed. However, in a company that I was at, that we actually it was another college that taught medical transcription to folks, and they would a medical transcriptionist takes the audio notes from a doctor and transcribes that into a written record, and there's a lot of medical terms that they need to know. Well, to be able to test our product, we had to have real live data, but it had to be scrubbed for any type of information that would reveal a real patient. Much care needs to be taken on that. Now, an ethical dilemma that we ran into is that stakeholders wanted a product released very quickly, and we didn't have that type of data that we could actually take the time to scrub, because that's very time consuming. And so
or even security, sometimes clients will push before the security measures are ready.
And we had to, and we were told, no, just use these just use the backup tapes here. No one will care. Well, yes, they do care. The United States government cares. And so that was a dilemma. Do we satisfy our stakeholders? In this case was the owner of the company who signed our paychecks, or do we push back, say that's ethically wrong to do that?
And we won't cross that line. Yes, and some other examples that I use in my courses all the time, as far as project managers being involved in ethical dilemmas. I use real world examples, such as the Samsung phone exploding. Someplace, someone released a product and approved that was okay before it was ready. The Volkswagen situation, somebody somewhere, some project manager somewhere okayed that, or sat in meetings where that was okay to have unethical data, and not the product wasn't of quality, and they allowed it to move on anyway. Wasn't safe, maybe. So let's move on to the next question. Are there any books you'd recommend for current software developers who are looking to move up the managerial ladder so they can be better at communicating with other departments and their own team? What kind of books have you read?
Well, I've got several here.
I was going to say, I'm going to look at mine too. I'm trying to remember the titles.
I probably not going to be able to do a video of them, but The Fifth Discipline by Peter Assange, the field book, and also The Art of Practice of a Learning Organization. Both those books are very good. As far as the practical application goes, there are a number of here. I'm going to hold up a book. I guess I can hold it up. I don't know if you can see that or not.
Yes.
Is That is the field book, the 5th discipline field book. Here is the main, oh, there we go. Right here. There are actually a number of good Scrum books. This particular one right here, Essential Scrum, I've used quite heavily. My department chair has just published a Scrum book, and it's also very good. So there are a lot of good books out there. As far as the leadership goes, it does not have to be focused on technology. Leadership, particularly as a servant leader, that is general leadership and management that applies to a number of different professions.
I agree. And there's certain ones that I think crucial conversations comes to mind for me, as far as it's just a general one. And as long as your team members, are feeling safe to say what's really going on, is pretty much the theme of crucial conversations. And that's critical for innovation. People can't feel like their ideas are stifled. The next question is, at the end of the project, how did the computer science students feel about the technology management students' role in the project? Did they value having a project manager involved in their project?
Oh, that's a very good question. And actually the feedback I got was very positive, the feedback was generally focused about the students, what they learned in the course, and the feedback was, hey, I learned how to communicate with individuals that came from a different background that I had, that they were not technical. And so I had to take the time to explain myself in non-technical terms. And of course, this transfers directly to, real life in industry. Most folks that computer science people will communicate with are not programmers, are not software engineers. And if you come across very technical using a lot of acronyms, people tune out very, very quickly. So one of the big feedbacks were, I learned how to communicate effectively, because if you didn't, the project failed. Generally, they thought it was an enriching experience. The stand-up reviews that we had, they could be, you could join those remotely. But a number of the tech management class would actually, and they met at a very different time than my class did. My class met in the evening. They would actually come into campus to sit in the classroom to be part of that review. And that was above and beyond what was expected of them.
That was totally surprising to me as well. We made it really clear that each class was their own course, and that they could meet with each other virtually. And it was not expected that they meet together in person. But what happened on their own, they chose to meet these people personally. And when my students presented at the end of the semester, the computer science students showed up to hear their presentations, and vice versa. Some of my students went in to hear the final presentations in the graduate course. So it ended up being a really great relationship thing. So the last question that I have is, thank you so much for this presentation. Oh, this has been applicable to many of my experiences, and has been both interesting and helpful. So, sorry, that wasn't a question, that was just a comment. And again, I apologize to those of you who asked questions earlier, and I didn't notice them in the YouTube chat, but we're glad we got through them all. And we hope in our conversations with each other, we answered some questions that you may have had that didn't get asked today. What else would you like? Anything else? Any other questions from our audience? I think even though it's slightly early, I feel comfortable that we've covered the topic. What do you think?
I think so.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. for participating today. And if you're watching this after the fact on the video, we're glad that you are interested. I didn't have our email addresses, but I'm happy to type them into the chat so that if you want to have further information in the future, either one of us are happy to expound or talk about this project, because it was a great project, and we hope to do similar with projects with other departments in the future using our structure. True?
Thank you.
Thank you. Typing now our addresses. See you later. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.